Rachel Reeves is hunting for billions, not millions, billions. And she's got a £50 billion black hole to fill. The rumours flying around Westminster right now are absolutely wild. Some say the VAT threshold is getting slashed to 30,000. Others claim it's actually going up to 100,000. Landlords might face an 8% national insurance bomb. Pensioners could start paying NI for the first time ever. Salary sacrifice? That neat little tax hack you've been using? Yeah, that might be toast. And here's the thing that should terrify you. This isn't about one big tax hike that makes headlines. This is death by 1,000 cuts. Small changes buried in the fine print that individually sound reasonable, but together could absolutely demolish your take-home pay or your business margins. So in this video, we're ripping apart every single proposal on the table. Not the sanitized Treasury version. The real impact on your wallet. And if you want to stay ahead of these changes before they wreck your finances, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for the latest property and tax news. Because when this budget drops, you'll want to know exactly what hit you. Right now, you don't have to register for VAT until you hit 90,000 in turnover. That's one of the highest thresholds in the entire world. Most countries make you register way earlier. But here's where it gets absolutely mental. There are two completely opposite rumours circulating right now, and nobody knows which one is real. The Daily Mail reported that Treasury officials are seriously considering slashing the threshold down to 30,000. A full-blown buzz cut. But at the exact same time, the Federation of Small Businesses is pushing hard for an increase to 100,000. So which is it? A massacre or a gift? Here's what's actually happening. The Treasury is playing both sides. They leaked both proposals deliberately to test public reaction. That phrase they keep using, under review, that's politician speak for, we're watching social media to see which version makes people angrier. Let's talk about what a cut to 30,000 actually means in real life. Imagine you're a sole trader. Maybe you do graphic design, sell handmade stuff on Etsy, or run a small consulting gig. You're pulling in 35,000 a year. Not exactly rolling in it, right? Suddenly, you've got two brutal choices. Option 1, start charging your clients 20% more and pray they don't immediately ghost you and find someone cheaper. Option 2, absorb that 20% yourself and instantly lose up to 16% of your income. Gone. Just like that. But here's the part that'll make your blood boil. VAT is charged on turnover, not profit. You could work your backside off all year, make about 300 quid profit on a job after expenses, and HMRC still takes their 20% slice like a hungry delivery driver who doesn't care if you're broke. Who actually gets hammered by this? It's not big corporations. They're already VAT registered and have accountants handling it. It's the side hustlers, the part-timers, the people running small businesses from their kitchen table, Etsy sellers, freelance photographers, mobile hairdressers, anyone trying to build something on the side while working a day job. Here's what you need to do right now, even if this doesn't pass. Start tracking your rolling 12-month turnover immediately. Don't wait until you think you're close to the threshold, because if this goes through, you might already be over it before you realise. And here's a weird twist. Voluntary VAT registration can actually work in your favour if you're buying a lot of stock or equipment. You can claim back the VAT on business purchases, so depending on your business model, registering early might save you money. Will this definitely happen? Honestly, it's hard to say. Reeves promised not to hit working people, and this would absolutely clobber the smallest businesses first, the ones with the thinnest margins and zero financial buffer. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd put the chance of a major cut at about 5 out of 10. But here's the sneaky bit. Even if she doesn't nuke it all the way down to 30,000, she could still shave off 10 or 15 grand and catch thousands more people in the net. And that might not even be the most shocking change on the table. Stamp duty, the tax that punishes you for daring to buy your own home. Right now, buyers get absolutely rinsed. You pay thousands in tax just for the privilege of purchasing a property over 250,000. But here's the twist that's got policy wonks buzzing. Reeves might not raise stamp duty, she might kill it entirely. Sounds brilliant, right? Free champagne for everyone. Not so fast. Read the small print because it gets ugly. Think tanks like the Resolution Foundation and Money Week have been pushing this idea for months. They say stamp duty holds people back from moving, creates a frozen housing market, and punishes mobility. So their solution? Scrap the tax on buyers completely and replace it with a seller's tax instead. Yeah, you read that right. Instead of buyers getting hammered, it's the sellers who get the bill. One version of this proposal only kicks in if your property is worth over $500,000. Another version says ditch stamp duty entirely and replace it with an annual property tax based on your home's current value. Imagine council tax, but with actual teeth, proper bite. Now here's where this gets painful for regular people. You bought your house 15 years ago for $250,000. Maybe it was a stretch at the time. You've paid your mortgage, done some improvements, kept the place nice. Today it's worth $600,000. Not because you're a property mogul, just because that's what happened to house prices. Congratulations, you've made a tidy gain on paper. Except now, if you want to move, you might owe tens of thousands in tax just for selling. And let's be brutally honest here, properties over $500,000 aren't just Notting Hill townhouses anymore. Plenty of ordinary homes in Manchester, Bristol, Surrey, even parts of Birmingham are sailing past that line. The threshold sounds high until you realise half the country is already there or getting close. So, if you're thinking about selling in the next year, you need to watch the budget timing like a hawk. Get a deal agreed before any changes take effect and you might dodge a monster tax bill. Wait too long and your for sale sign could come with a side order of HMRC taking a massive chunk. Will it actually happen? Big structural reforms like this take consultation, planning, infrastructure. You can't just flip a switch, so I'd put the likelihood at about 4 out of 10 for this budget. More likely, we'll see hints and trial balloons, not the full hammer blow. But if you thought selling your house was already stressful, just wait. If you're a landlord, you might want to sit down for this one. There is serious, credible talk of slapping an 8% national insurance charge directly on rental profits, not rental income, profits. Let me break down what that means in actual numbers. Say you make $20,000 a year from rent after your mortgage and expenses. Under this proposal, you'd pay an extra £1,600 on top of the income tax you already owe. No new allowances, no extra deductions to soften the blow, just more tax, straight out of your pocket. And the government's justification? Fairness. If someone earning a $20,000 salary pays national insurance, why shouldn't a landlord making $20,000 from rent? Sounds reasonable when they say it fast, doesn't it? Until you remember that landlords are already getting absolutely destroyed from every angle. Mortgage interest relief has been stripped back. You used to be able to deduct your full mortgage interest from rental income before tax. Now you get a measly 20% tax credit instead, which is useless if you're a higher rate taxpayer. Then there are stricter EPC rules. Properties need to meet minimum energy efficiency standards or you literally can't rent them out. That costs thousands to fix. Council tax keeps climbing. Maintenance costs are through the roof. Tenant regulations are getting tighter, which is fair enough, but it all costs money. And now they want to add an 8% national insurance charge on top. Research from property groups suggests this could raise around $2.18 billion for the Treasury. Some landlords would be facing an extra £885 per property annually, and the impact is already showing. An inventory-based study found that 21% of landlords are planning to exit the market entirely in 2025. That's more than 1 in 5. Letting agents are reporting a mass exodus of small landlords who just can't make the numbers work anymore. If this hits, the only smart move is to treat your rental property like an actual business. Claim every single allowable expense: insurance, repairs, maintenance, travel to the property, professional fees, software subscriptions, everything. Keep your profits as lean as legally possible. And if you own multiple properties, it might be time to seriously crunch the numbers on whether moving them into a limited company helps or actually makes things worse. Because it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. Sometimes it saves you money, sometimes it costs you more. You need proper analysis based on your specific situation. The chances of this change actually happening? I'd give it a 7 out of 10. It's politically neat, easy to sell to voters, simple to implement because HRC already has all the data, and it raises serious money. But landlords aren't the only ones with a giant target painted on their backs. One of the simplest ways to pass on wealth has always been to give it away while you're still alive. Right now, you can gift up to $3,000 per year completely tax-free. Give more than that. As long as you survive 7 years after making the gift, it usually escapes inheritance tax completely. It's called taper relief. But here's the problem. That loophole is firmly in the crosshairs. Policy groups are pushing hard for lifetime caps on gifting. Others want to scrap taper relief altogether so fewer gifts can slip through the net. And with the inheritance tax threshold frozen at $325,000 since 2009, that's 16 years without any increase, more and more ordinary families are getting dragged into the inheritance tax system. This isn't just affecting the wealthy anymore. Think about it realistically. A 3-bedroom semi in London or the South East, not a mansion, just a normal family home. Add a modest pension pot, maybe a life insurance policy, some savings. Suddenly, your estate is way over the $325,000 line, and inheritance tax bites hard, 40% of everything above the threshold, which means that gift you're planning to help your kids with a house deposit or moving assets out of your estate too late could end up costing your family tens of thousands down the line. The smart play right now is to move money sooner rather than later, while today's rules still apply. Because if Labour does tweak the gifting rules, it's almost certain they'll apply going forward, not backwards. Move early and you can lock in today's allowances. Wait, and you might be stuck with whatever new restrictions they dream up. I'd rate the likelihood of this happening at 6 out of 10. It probably won't be headline policy. Reeves won't stand at the dispatch box and announce it dramatically. But it's exactly the kind of thing that sneaks into the fine print of the budget document on page 47, and you only notice it when HMRC is already knocking at the door demanding payment. And if you think that sounds sneaky, wait until you hear about the merger that could change how every single person in the UK gets taxed. There's a big idea floating around Westminster right now, and if it lands, it will fundamentally change the way every person in this country pays tax. The pitch sounds harmless. Cut national insurance by 2p, then hike income tax by 2p to balance it out. Revenue neutral, right? On paper, most people wouldn't even notice a difference in their payslip. Same money out, same money in. But here's the sting, and this is crucial. It's not about how much you pay, it's about who pays. Because right now, national insurance is only paid by employees and the self-employed. That's it. But landlords collecting rent, pensioners drawing income, company directors taking dividends, they don't pay national insurance. They escape it entirely. Shift that tax burden into income tax instead, and suddenly those groups are paying too. Every single one of them. Overnight. The Resolution Foundation reckons this move could raise £6 billion a year without the government ever having to admit they raise taxes. It's the classic magician's trick. Look over here at the 2p cut while we quietly expand who's actually paying over there. Same money, different pockets. For you, depending on how you earn, this could be massive. Landlords lose another big slice of rental profit. Dividends stop being the neat little tax-efficient loophole they used to be. Salary sacrifice schemes become far less powerful because the savings shrink. Pension planning needs a complete rethink. In other words, if your income doesn't come from a standard employment contract, this reform could hike your tax bill overnight. No fanfare, no front-page headlines, just a new financial reality. And here's the kicker. Rachel Reeves has already publicly said she's open to structural reform of the tax system. That's politician speak for, we are seriously considering this. She's testing the waters, seeing how people react. I'd give this a 6 out of 10 chance of making it into the budget in some form. It's bold, it's clean, it's brutally effective at raising money, and it lets the government claim they're simplifying the tax system while actually just expanding the net. Which brings us to something that high earners and company directors use all the time, and it might be about to disappear completely. Salary sacrifice has been one of the neatest tax hacks left in the system for years. Here's how it works. You agree to swap part of your salary before tax for certain benefits: pension contributions, electric company cars, cycle to work schemes, even extra holiday days in some cases. The win is massive. You pay less income tax, you pay less national insurance, and your employer saves on their national insurance contributions too. Everyone's happy. Well, everyone except HMRC. And that's precisely why it's now firmly on the chopping block. Policy groups are actively pushing for changes. Some want a hard cap on how much you can sacrifice annually. Others want to scrap the national insurance savings altogether. And there's talk of narrowing the list of perks that actually qualify for the scheme. Here's the most alarming part about this potential change. Salary sacrifice runs entirely through payroll systems. That means Reeves could literally flick the switch overnight. No new infrastructure needed, no complex rollout plan, no lengthy consultation period, just gone. One budget speech and the benefit vanishes. Who loses the most if this happens? Higher earners who've structured their finances around it. Company directors salting away big chunks into pensions. Employees driving £40,000 Teslas on salary sacrifice deals through work. Those tax savings could evaporate in one afternoon. I'd put the odds of some form of salary sacrifice reform at 7 out of 10. It won't be headline material because most voters don't even know what salary sacrifice is. But it's simple to implement. It's politically easy to sell as closing a loophole, and it's worth billions to the Treasury. So if you're currently leaning heavily on salary sacrifice arrangements, you need to run the numbers now on what happens if it disappears. Have a backup plan ready. This is the tax grab that nobody will see coming because it doesn't involve raising any headline tax rate. Instead, HMRC just quietly moves the goalposts on what counts for relief. Right now, loads of things aren't taxed at the full 20% VAT rate. Children's clothes, books, most food. Those are zero rated. Some things like energy-efficient home upgrades or electric vehicle charging are charged at just 5%. But here's the danger. Reeves could simply bump some of these reliefs up to the full 20% rate. No big announcement, no headlines screaming about a tax rise, but suddenly your weekly food shop costs more. Your construction project gets pricier. Your EV charging bill goes up. Everything just quietly becomes more expensive, and nobody can quite put their finger on why. If you're working in a sector that relies on these reliefs, construction, education, health, renewables, this isn't just about higher prices for customers. It's also about more admin, new VAT codes to learn, new invoicing formats, more ways to accidentally trip up on your VAT returns and get hit with penalties. The Treasury absolutely loves this trick because it's subtle. It raises billions, and it's politically easy to spin. We didn't raise taxes, we just made the system fairer. Yeah, fairer for the government's bank account. The likelihood of some form of VAT relief tweaking? I'd say 6 out of 10. It won't grab newspaper headlines, but if it happens, it'll quietly siphon thousands from small businesses, and nobody will notice the full impact until they're already bleeding money. And when you add this to everything else on the table, you start to see the real picture of what Reeves is planning. So based on everything we've covered, every rumour, every leaked proposal, every think tank suggestion, which of these tax changes are actually likely to land in Rachel Reeves's first budget? Here's how I'd rank them from most to least likely, and this is based on political feasibility, revenue potential, and how easy they are to implement. Number 1. National insurance on rental income. 7 out of 10. It's politically neat, easy to justify, and raises serious money. Number 2. Salary sacrifice reform. another 7 out of 10. Simple to implement and most voters won't even understand what's being cut. Number 3, VAT Relief Tweaks, a sneaky 6 out of 10, won't make headlines but quietly raises billions. Number 4, the National Insurance and Income Tax Merger, 6 out of 10, structural reform that expands the tax base without technically raising rates. Number 5, inheritance tax gift changes, 6 out of 10 likelihood, perfect for burying in the fine print where nobody notices until it's too late. Number 6, slashing the VAT threshold down to 30,000. I'd put that at 5 out of 10. It would cause a massive backlash, but the Treasury is definitely considering it. And number 7, the stamp duty replacement with a seller's tax. That's more difficult to implement quickly, so 4 out of 10 for this budget. So what should you actually do with this information? Don't panic, but definitely don't wait around either. Because even if just 2 or 3 of these proposals go through, the cumulative impact on your business or your income could be way bigger than it looks on paper. This isn't about one giant tax hike that makes the front pages. This is about 5 or 6 smaller changes that individually sound reasonable, but together fundamentally reshape your financial reality. Your take-home pay shrinks, your business margins get squeezed, your property becomes less profitable, and it all happens gradually enough that you don't realise how much has been taken until you sit down and actually do the math. The real strategy here is death by 1,000 cuts. Small changes, buried clauses, technical adjustments, each one defensible on its own, but together, it's a completely different tax landscape. And by the time you've adjusted to one change, 3 more have already hit. If you want help navigating any of this, whether it's VAT planning, property income structuring, or setting up smarter salary arrangements before these changes potentially kick in, book a free call using the link in the description. And if you found this breakdown useful, if it helped you see what's actually coming instead of just the sanitized Treasury version, hit that subscribe button. Because when this budget actually drops, I'll be right here to break down exactly what passed, what got cut, and, most importantly, what it means for your wallet. No jargon, no political spin, just the real impact. See you when the hammer drops. Right now, thousands of UK homeowners are lying awake at night wondering if they're about to be hit with a tax bill that could force them out of homes they've owned for decades. The mansion tax rumours are swirling harder than ever. And Rightmove, the country's biggest property portal, just issued a stark warning to the government about what could happen next. Whether you're trying to buy your first home, thinking about downsizing, or just wondering if your property is suddenly going to cost you thousands more each year, this affects you. And the truth? It's more complicated and more concerning than most people realise. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to Property Reporter for the latest property news and analysis that actually matters to your wallet. So what exactly are we talking about when people say mansion tax? Because here's the thing, there isn't just one proposal floating around Westminster right now. There are 3 separate ideas being discussed, and each one would reshape the UK housing market in a different way. The first is scrapping capital gains tax exemption on main homes. Right now, when you sell your primary residence, you don't pay a penny in capital gains on whatever profit you've made over the years. That could change, particularly for higher value properties. And if you're wondering which homes would get hit hardest, look south. London and the South East would bear the brunt of this one. The second proposal is replacing stamp duty with an annual property tax, but only for the most expensive homes. The rumour mill says we're talking about properties valued over £500,000. Treasury officials have denied this specific plan, but the idea keeps resurfacing in policy discussions. Then there's the third option, and this one's particularly interesting. Some think tanks want to scrap council tax entirely. Sounds brilliant, right? Except they want to replace it with an annual tax calculated as a percentage of your property's value, with a minimum floor of £800 and a cap at the higher end. None of this is official policy yet, but the speculation alone is already causing real damage to market confidence. The anxiety is hitting certain groups particularly hard. and older homeowners are feeling it the most. Many of them bought properties 30 or 40 years ago when prices were a fraction of what they are today. Their homes have skyrocketed in value, but their incomes haven't kept pace. A lot of these people are living on fixed pensions, watching their properties appreciate into the millions while struggling with everyday expenses. Suddenly, they're facing a scenario where they might not be able to afford to stay in homes they've lived in for decades. But here's the cruel twist. Even if they decide to sell and downsize, they'd get hammered with new taxes on the way out, potentially leaving them without enough money to buy something smaller in a decent area. And it's not just retirees who are nervous. Anyone thinking about moving up or down the property ladder is asking the same question right now. Should I wait? Should I sell before the rules change? That kind of hesitation doesn't just affect individual decisions. It sends shockwaves through the entire housing market. When people start hitting pause on major life decisions because of political uncertainty, the whole system starts to seize up. Rightmove didn't just join this debate with opinions, they came armed with data, and the numbers tell a story that should make policymakers very nervous. Nationally, about 30% of properties in England are worth £500,000 or more. If an annual property tax replaced stamp duty at that threshold, nearly a third of the housing stock would be directly impacted. But here's where it gets really uneven. Geography matters massively in English property, and a single national threshold would create wildly different outcomes depending on where you live. In London, the average property price sits around £600,000, and a staggering 59% of properties currently for sale are above that £500,000 mark. Compare that to the North East, where only 8% of properties for sale hit that threshold. Any policy with a fixed price point is going to feel completely different depending on your postcode. The data on sales agreed this year makes the disparity even clearer. Across England, 19% of agreed sales have been above £500,000. In London, that figure jumps to 52%, more than half of all transactions. In the North East, it's just 4%. When you look at the luxury end of the market, properties over £1.5 million represent just 1% of the national housing stock. Sounds small, right? But in London, it's 1 in every 10 properties for sale, and 5% of all agreed sales fall into that bracket. In the North East, the figure is basically negligible at 0.1%. What this data screams is that any blanket policy is going to hit different regions in completely different ways, and London is going to bear a disproportionate burden compared to the rest of the country. So who actually benefits from these proposals, and who gets left behind? Rightmove argues that shifting property taxes from buyers to sellers could genuinely help first-time buyers. These buyers already face the triple challenge of saving massive deposits, meeting strict mortgage affordability criteria, and then getting hit with stamp duty on top. Removing that final hurdle could make home ownership accessible to thousands more people. But there's a massive catch that nobody seems to be talking about enough. If sellers suddenly have to pay a new tax, what's stopping them from simply raising their asking prices to compensate? If that happens, the benefit to first-time buyers evaporates completely, and we're right back where we started. For people in the middle of the market, around that £500,000 threshold, these proposals could create absolute chaos. Imagine you bought your home 5 years ago and paid stamp duty like everyone else. Now you want to sell and move somewhere else, but suddenly there's a new tax on sellers. You'd be paying twice, once when you bought and once when you sell. That's not going to make you happy, and it's certainly not going to encourage you to move. And if these changes come in while you're mid-transaction, you could find yourself caught between two systems, potentially liable for taxes under both. That uncertainty alone is enough to make people pull out of sales and just stay put. At the luxury end, properties over £1.5 million might only represent 1% of the national market. But in London and the South East, they're a crucial part of the housing economy. If owners of these properties feel they're being unfairly targeted, they'll simply choose not to move. That might sound like a minor issue, but these properties often sit at the top of long chains. When the top of the chain freezes, everyone below it gets stuck too. Mobility grinds to a halt, and, ironically, downsizing becomes even less attractive than it already is, despite all the taxes already in place to discourage staying in large family homes. Here's the twist that should worry the Treasury. If transaction volumes fall because people are too scared or too financially constrained to move, the government might actually collect less tax revenue than before. It's the law of unintended consequences playing out in real time, and it's happened before with previous stamp duty changes. But what about renters? Where do they fit into all this? If stamp duty gets shifted from buyers to sellers, it could theoretically make it easier for renters to take that first step onto the property ladder. But during the transition period, while these changes are being debated and potentially implemented, they're stuck renting. And the rental market right now is brutal. Rents are 44% higher than they were before the pandemic. Let that sink in. Nearly half again as expensive in just a few years. On top of that, there's 26% less rental stock available compared to pre-pandemic levels. Fewer properties, higher prices, and more competition for every available rental. Landlords are already leaving the market in significant numbers, squeezed by tax changes, increased regulations, and lower yields. These mansion tax rumours aren't just about owner-occupiers. Buy-to-let properties would be caught up in this too. If more landlords decide the game isn't worth playing anymore and sell up, where does that leave renters? With even fewer options and even higher rents. The people who are furthest from home ownership could end up being the ones who suffer most from policies designed to target the wealthy. Now here's the reality check that everyone needs to hear. None of this is guaranteed to happen. Not one of these proposals is set in stone. Council tax reform has been talked about for years, and any major overhaul would likely take years more to implement. We're probably looking at the next Parliament at the earliest, and by then, who knows who'll be in power or what their priorities will be. The idea of shifting stamp duty from buyers to sellers is just that, an idea being floated by a think tank. It's not government policy, and there's no indication it will become policy anytime soon. As for removing capital gains tax exemption on main homes, that would be an absolute political bombshell. Does Labour really want to risk the backlash from homeowners across the country, especially in marginal constituencies where elections are won and lost? History suggests they probably don't. Because here's the thing about mansion tax proposals. They've been around for over a decade and they almost never actually happen. Let's take a quick walk through recent history. In 2010, the Liberal Democrats proposed a 1% annual tax on homes worth over £2 million. Went nowhere. In 2012, George Osborne considered introducing extra council tax bans for expensive properties, but dropped the idea because the Conservatives had promised not to introduce a mansion tax. Between 2013 and 2015, Labour pushed hard for a mansion tax on properties over £2 million, even making it a manifesto pledge. They later shelved it. In 2015, the Lib Dems tried again with a banded tax ranging from £2,000 to £9,000 a year for homes over £2 million. That collapsed too. The pattern is crystal clear. Mansion tax ideas surface regularly in British politics, they generate headlines and anxiety, and then they quietly disappear under political pressure. Wealth taxes are politically radioactive in the UK, especially when they target people's homes. So while these current rumours are causing real stress and uncertainty, the historical odds of them actually becoming policy are surprisingly low. So what should you actually do if you're in the middle of buying, selling, or thinking about downsizing? The most important advice is simple. Don't let rumours and speculation drive your major life decisions. If you've found a property that fits your budget and meets your needs, don't pull out just because of political noise. We don't know if any of these proposals will happen. We don't know what form they might take if they do, and we certainly don't know what the rates or thresholds would be. Instead, focus on what you can actually control. Can you comfortably afford the property you're considering? Not just the mortgage payments, but the ongoing costs of ownership. Do you have wiggle room in your budget if things get more expensive down the line, whether through new taxes, rising interest rates, or unexpected repairs? If you're thinking about downsizing, ask yourself an honest question. Would you still be downsizing regardless of these headlines? Because here's the thing, if you change your plans every time there's political turmoil or a new policy proposal, you'll be changing your mind every couple of years. Look at the chaos we've had in UK politics recently. You can't live your life based on what might happen in Westminster. If the answer is yes, you'd be downsizing anyway because it makes sense for your lifestyle and finances, then go ahead. If the answer is no, and you're only considering it because of tax fears, then it's probably best to hold off and wait for clarity. The UK housing market is incredibly sensitive to taxation changes. Every time stamp duty gets adjusted, we see spikes in activity followed by sudden stalls. We saw exactly this pattern last year with Labour's autumn budget and the stamp duty changes announced there. People rushed to complete transactions before the changes kicked in, then the market went quiet. That kind of volatility helps nobody, not buyers, not sellers, and certainly not the government trying to manage the economy. For now, the best approach is to stay calm and avoid panic buying or panic selling. What we're seeing right now is more politics than policy, more speculation than substance. Until something actually gets announced as official government policy, it's just noise. Expensive, anxiety-inducing noise, but noise nonetheless. So here's my question for you. Do you think shifting taxes from buyers to sellers would actually help first-time buyers get on the ladder? Or would it just stall the market by putting off downsizers and middle-market movers? And if you're currently trying to buy or sell, are these rumours affecting your decisions? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. This debate affects millions of people, and your perspective matters. Let's keep this conversation going. The UK property market just went through its biggest transformation in decades, and most people have no idea what just happened. Mortgage rules quietly loosened to push more money into the system. A record wave of landlords abandoning ship while corporate giants swoop in to buy entire streets. Tax proposals that could hit nearly every home worth over £500,000. And a supply surge that's doing the opposite of what you'd expect. Whether you own property, rent, or you're desperately trying to get on the ladder, what's unfolding right now will affect your wealth, your choices, and your future. This isn't just another market cycle. Something fundamental has shifted, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Before we dive in, smash that like button and subscribe to Property Reporter for the latest news and analysis that actually matters. We cut through the noise and bring you the facts other channels won't touch. Let me walk you through exactly what's happening, starting with the change that's flying completely under the radar. Back in March, the Financial Conduct Authority sent out guidance that most mainstream outlets barely mentioned. But it's already changing who can and cannot buy a house in Britain. Since the 2008 crash, every single mortgage application has been stress tested. Banks don't just check if you can afford today's rate. They test whether you'd survive if rates suddenly jumped by 2, 3, even 4 percentage points. The logic made sense after the financial crisis. Protect borrowers from getting in over their heads, protect the system from collapsing again. But here's where it gets interesting. Interest rates are falling in 2025, yet lenders have been stress testing applications as if rates were about to skyrocket. They've been using reversion rates, those punishing rates you roll onto after your fixed deal ends, plus extra margin on top. In practice, this locked out thousands of buyers who could easily afford their mortgage at current market rates. The FCA finally told lenders they had far more flexibility than they were using. Base your stress tests on realistic expectations for the next 5 years, not worst-case doomsday scenarios. If rates are trending downward, your tests need to reflect reality. They also reminded banks about their consumer duty obligations. In plain terms, don't design your lending criteria in ways that unfairly exclude people who can actually afford to borrow. This is a quiet but significant loosening of the rules. It's not as dramatic as scrapping stress tests entirely, but it's a clear signal from regulators that they want more approvals, more transactions, more activity. Then, in July, the FCA dropped an even bigger update. They simplified the entire mortgage rulebook, stripped away old red tape, and made it significantly easier for people to switch lenders and reduce borrowing terms. Remortgaging became smoother. You can now pay off your mortgage faster without drowning in paperwork. You can have informal conversations with lenders without triggering full regulatory advice requirements every single time. The system is loosening, and it's happening fast. On top of all this, the loan-to-income flow rate limits changed. From July onward, only lenders issuing over £150 million annually have to follow the rule limiting high loan-to-income mortgages to 15% of their lending. Smaller lenders are exempt. What does that mean for you? More lenders can now offer 5, even 6 times your income instead of the old 4 times standard. And there's a new government mortgage guarantee scheme available to lenders, making it easier to approve buyers with smaller deposits. So here's the question nobody's asking out loud. Is this about helping people, or is this about keeping house prices inflated? Because when you make it easier to borrow, you don't just increase affordability, you increase demand. And with supply still so constrained, that demand doesn't make homes cheaper. It pushes prices right back up again. The government and regulators want growth, want movement, want transactions. But growth, built on easier credit, has a nasty habit of ending badly. We've seen this movie before, which brings us to the next force that's colliding with all of this. Rightmove and Zoopla are both reporting the highest number of homes listed for sale in over a decade. Listings jumped 10% year on year, which sounds like great news for buyers. More choice, more competition among sellers, better deals. Except there's a problem. Demand only increased by 4%. That gap matters. Sellers are now chasing buyers instead of the other way around, and it's creating a very different dynamic than what we saw during the pandemic frenzy. Zoopla's forecast predicts house price growth will slow to between 1.5% and 2% for 2025. When you adjust for inflation, that's essentially flat. Some regions might see small increases, others might see slight declines, but the overall picture is stagnation. So why are so many people suddenly selling? It's not because the market looks attractive, it's because they have no choice. Remember all those buyers who locked in ultra-cheap mortgage deals back in 2020 and 2021? Rates were sitting at 2%, sometimes even lower. Those fixed-term deals are expiring now, and homeowners are facing a brutal reality. Their monthly payments are jumping by 30%, 40%, sometimes even 50%. Thousands of households simply can't afford to refinance at today's rates, even with the relaxed lending rules. So they're selling instead. This isn't a trickle. It's a wave, and it's only just started. Estate agents across the country are seeing the same pattern. Motivated sellers, realistic pricing, longer time on market. Properties that would have sold in days during the pandemic are now sitting for weeks or months. Buyers have more power than they've had in years, but only if they can actually get mortgage approval and afford the new rates. The supply surge should be good news, but it's a symptom of financial stress, not market health. And here's the kicker. The government knows this. That's exactly why they're so keen to loosen lending rules, make it easier to borrow more money, push more buyers into the market. Because if they don't, if demand stays weak while supply keeps flooding in, prices don't just stagnate, they start falling. And falling house prices terrify policymakers more than almost anything else. Property wealth props up consumer spending, funds retirement plans, backs loans across the entire economy. A crash doesn't just hurt homeowners, it threatens the whole system. But while everyday sellers struggle and compete, a completely different group is making their move. The Renters' Rights Bill and mounting tax pressure are driving landlords out of the market at an unprecedented rate. On the surface, that sounds brilliant. Fewer landlords competing for properties means less competition for first-time buyers, right? Except it's not that simple. Short-term, rental supply is dropping hard, which means rents are climbing even higher. Long-term, The landlords who are leaving aren't the ones tenants should want to lose. The government commissioned the English Private Landlord Survey, published just last December. This wasn't some biased think tank report. This was neutral, statistical, government-funded research into how different types of landlords actually behave. And the findings are uncomfortable. Large landlords, those with 5 or more properties, are twice as likely to have evicted a tenant in the past year. They're significantly more likely to raise rent between tenancies or during renewals. 75% of large landlords increased rent for new tenants. 63% raised it for renewals. They adjust rent based purely on market conditions. No emotion, no leniency. Small landlords, those with just 1 or 2 properties, are far more likely to hold rent steady, especially for long-term tenants. They're often emotionally invested, more flexible, more willing to work with tenants going through tough times. And according to the government's own survey, these small landlords are the ones planning to sell. Increased regulation, reduced tax relief, uncertainty around the Renters' Rights Bill. Those are the top reasons they're getting out. Who's staying? The big players. The ones with 5, 10, 50, 100 properties. The ones more likely to evict, more likely to maximise rent, more likely to treat tenants like line items on a balance sheet. So while the stated goal is protecting renters, the actual policy is pushing out statistically better landlords and leaving behind the ones tenants are most likely to have problems with. This is the same pattern playing out across every industry. Local coffee shops buried by Starbucks. Family-run chippies replaced by soulless fast food chains. Black cab drivers pushed out by Uber's algorithm. Not because the big players are better, but because they can handle red tape at scale, absorb regulatory costs, and optimize through systems. What do we lose? Personal service, flexibility, local trust. That's exactly what's happening in the rental market right now. This bill will widen wealth inequality, not solve the housing crisis. It's consolidating rental property into fewer, wealthier hands. Corporates, institutions, and large portfolio landlords are piling in, while ordinary people are being squeezed out. Which leads directly to the most alarming development of all. We're no longer just competing with everyday landlords or small-time investors. We're competing with BlackRock, Lloyds Banking Group, Granger, Legal and General. These aren't companies dabbling in property. They own thousands upon thousands of homes, not scattered individual purchases, entire developments, whole streets bought before they even hit the open market. BlackRock has gone so far as to buy stakes in brick manufacturers. Think about that for a second. They're not just buying finished homes, they're controlling the supply chain, the actual building blocks of UK housing. That's how confident they are that this market is worth dominating. Blackstone, another massive player, is buying up railway arches, land banks, anything with development potential. Why? Because housing has become one of the safest, most profitable investments in the world. Inflation makes rents go up. Debt stays fixed or gets cheaper in real terms. People always need somewhere to live, no matter what happens to the economy. Even when everything else collapses, people pay rent. They have to. It's not optional. These corporations understand something fundamental that most individuals miss. Housing isn't just shelter anymore. It's a financial asset class, and it's too profitable to leave in the hands of ordinary people. Remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs from school? Food, water, shelter at the bottom. The absolute essentials for survival. Corporate landlords know they're providing one of those essentials, which means demand is completely inelastic. Tenants can't just decide not to rent. They can't boycott or shop around indefinitely. They need a roof over their heads, and they'll pay whatever the market demands. That's why institutional investors see UK housing as a goldmine. This shift fundamentally changes the game. When your landlord is a person, there's room for negotiation, for human understanding, for flexibility during hard times. When your landlord is an algorithm optimizing returns for shareholders, you're just a data point. Rent goes up because the model says it should. Maintenance gets delayed because it impacts quarterly profits. Evictions happen faster because there's no personal relationship slowing down the process. The buy-to-let exodus isn't creating opportunities for regular buyers. It's creating a feeding frenzy for institutional capital. And once these corporations own enough of the housing stock, they don't just control shelter. They control a massive portion of household income, consumer spending power, and economic stability. That concentration of power should concern everyone, whether you rent or own. But the final force reshaping UK property might be the most explosive of all. HMRC pulled in almost £15 billion from stamp duty last year, and that's despite transaction volumes being down. The tax take from property is enormous, and the government knows it. But behind closed doors, think tanks and policy advisors are pushing for something much bigger. A land value tax that would replace both council tax and stamp duty. Leaked proposals suggest a new levy specifically targeting homes worth over £500,000. If that sounds like it would only affect the wealthy, think again. In London, you can find two-bedroom flats going for £500,000. Across the southeast, ordinary family homes are well over that threshold. This isn't about taxing oligarchs and mega mansions. This is about extracting more revenue from middle-class homeowners who've watched their property values climb, not because they're rich, but because the market went insane. The political appeal is obvious. Property wealth is concentrated among older voters who already own homes. Younger voters, locked out of ownership, are far more supportive of taxing property wealth. It's a tempting way to raise revenue without touching income tax or VAT. But the consequences could be seismic. Homeowners over the threshold would face annual bills potentially worth thousands of pounds. Some would be forced to sell. Others would see their retirement plans shattered. The southeast property market, already under pressure, could face a sudden correction. Nobody knows exactly what form these tax changes will take or when they'll arrive, but the direction of travel is clear. The government needs revenue, and property is one of the few places left with substantial untapped wealth. Stamp duty already raised £15 billion in a slow market. Imagine what a comprehensive land value tax could pull in. The risk is that it tips the market into a spiral. Forced sales increase supply, prices drop, more homeowners find themselves in negative equity, more forced sales follow. It's a feedback loop that's very hard to stop once it starts. Here's where we actually are. Mortgages are easier to get, which sounds positive until you realise it risks inflating prices all over again. Supply is surging, but mostly because people are being forced to sell, not because the market is healthy. Small landlords are fleeing, but corporate giants are circling like vultures, ready to snap up everything they leave behind. And tax proposals are being drafted that could upend the entire market for anyone with property worth over £500,000. These five forces aren't separate issues. They're connected, feeding into each other, creating a system that feels increasingly rigged against ordinary people. Easier borrowing props up prices so sellers can exit without crashing the market. Landlord exodus creates opportunities for institutions to consolidate power. Tax changes could force more sales, giving corporations even more buying opportunities. Everything points in one direction. Housing is being transformed from something people own into something people rent from massive corporations. The UK property market hasn't just shifted in 2025, it's fundamentally changed. The question isn't whether you like these changes. The question is whether you understand them well enough to make smart decisions for your own situation. Do these forces stabilise the market, or are we heading towards something completely unrecognisable? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely read almost every single one, and I learn from your perspectives. If you found this breakdown valuable, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next update. More importantly, share this with someone who needs to understand what's really happening. The more people who see through the noise, the more pressure we can put on policymakers to actually fix the system, instead of just propping it up. What happens next affects all of us, whether we own, rent, or we're still trying to get that first foot on the ladder. Knowledge is power, and right now, we need all the power we can get. The applause was warm at the Labour Party conference, but behind the smiles, Rachel Reeves is facing the most impossible situation any Chancellor has dealt with in decades. She needs to find £30 billion, and she's already promised not to touch income tax, national insurance, or VAT. So where's the money coming from? If you own property, run a buy-to-let portfolio, or have any kind of real estate investment, you need to pay very close attention because you're about to become the government's cash machine. The warning signs are everywhere. Treasury insiders are leaking stories to the press. Tax advisors are fielding panicked calls from clients. And property investors across the country are rushing to restructure their portfolios before it's too late. Before we dive into exactly what's coming your way, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to Property Reporter for the latest news that actually affects your investments and your wallet. Here's the situation. The Chancellor stood on stage and promised economic responsibility while knowing she's staring down a financial black hole that's getting deeper by the day. The government's own forecaster, the Office for Budget Responsibility, is about to deliver devastating news this Friday about productivity growth, which means lower tax revenues across the board. Productivity measures what we produce as a nation for every hour worked, and it's been dismal since the 2008 financial crisis. The OBR doesn't think it's going to bounce back anymore, which is catastrophic for government finances. Lower productivity means lower wages, lower company profits, and, critically for Rachel Reeves, lower tax revenues. The downgrade could be massive, potentially adding another 10 to 20 billion to the hole she needs to fill. Borrowing costs are higher than predicted 6 months ago because global interest rates haven't fallen the way everyone hoped. Welfare savings didn't materialise because benefit spending is stickier than politicians want to admit, and every single day that passes, the gap gets wider. But here's what should terrify every property investor watching this. When governments run out of options, they always, and I mean always, turn to property. It's the biggest asset class in the UK. Total residential property wealth is estimated at over £8 trillion. It's visible. It's mostly owned by people who can't hide it offshore. And politically, landlords make an easy target. Labour has a long history of going after the buy-to-let sector. And with Reeves backed into this corner, it's about to happen again on a scale we haven't seen before. Let's talk about capital gains tax, because this is almost certainly getting hammered in the November budget. Right now, if you sell a property that isn't your main residence, you pay 24% on any gains above the annual allowance, which itself has been slashed to just £6,000 for this tax year. That's already brutal compared to what it used to be. The CGT allowance was £12,300 in 2021, and now it's been cut by more than half. But the rumours swirling around Westminster suggest Reeves is looking at aligning CGT rates with income tax rates. That means, if you're a higher rate taxpayer, you could be facing 40%. If you're in the additional rate band, we're talking 45% on your property profits. Think about what that actually means in real numbers. You buy a buy-to-let property for £250,000. You hold it for 15 years, dealing with all the tenant headaches, the boiler breakdowns at 2 in the morning, the void periods where you're covering the mortgage yourself, the Section 21 ban making it harder to regain possession. The property increases in value to £500,000. That's a £250,000 gain. Under current rules, you pay £6,000 in annual allowance, leaving £244,000 taxable. At 24%, that's £58,560 in tax. Painful but manageable. Under the rumoured new system, if you're a 40% taxpayer, that same gain costs you £97,600. If you're at 45%, it's £109,800. You've just lost an extra £50,000 or more to the Treasury compared to selling under the current system. This isn't speculation anymore. Multiple tax experts, accountants who specialise in property, And even some former Treasury advisors are saying this is the most likely revenue raiser because it hits wealth, not income, which means Reeves can technically keep her promise about not raising income tax rates. The impact on the market will be massive. Investors who are considering selling are rushing to complete transactions before November 26th. Some are accepting lower offers just to get completions through before budget day. Portfolio landlords are having urgent conversations with their accountants about whether to crystallize gains now, even if the timing isn't perfect. And anyone who was planning to exit the market in the next few years is asking themselves whether they need to do it right now, immediately, before the window closes. But CGT is just the beginning. Stamp duty is another target that's lighting up red on Treasury spreadsheets. Currently, if you buy an additional property, you pay an extra 5% on top of standard stamp duty rates. That surcharge was introduced back in 2016 to cool the buy-to-let market, and it worked. Transactions dropped significantly. The government literally made it more expensive to provide rental housing while simultaneously complaining about rental shortages. The logic never made sense, but the revenue mattered more than market consequences. Now there's serious talk about pushing that surcharge even higher, potentially to 7 or even 10%. Do the math on that. Buy a property for £400,000 as an additional home, and under current rules, you're paying 5% on the first £125,000, then 10% on the next slice up to £250,000, then 15% above that, because of the 5% surcharge stacking on top of standard rates. That comes out to around £25,000 in stamp duty. If they increase the surcharge to 10% instead of 5%, you're suddenly paying close to £40,000. That's money you're never getting back. It's not an investment, it's not adding value to the property, it's just gone straight to the Treasury. And it fundamentally changes the calculations on whether a property deal makes sense. For professional landlords adding to portfolios, this could make expansion virtually impossible. The yields you need to justify a purchase become unrealistic. For people buying second homes or holiday lets in places like Cornwall or the Lake District, the numbers stop working entirely. You might love having a coastal cottage, but can you justify paying an extra £20,000 in tax just for the privilege of buying it? The property market runs on transactions, and every time government increases stamp duty, liquidity dries up. Sellers can't find buyers willing to pay the inflated costs. Properties sit on the market longer. Prices stagnate because buyers factor the tax into what they're willing to offer, and the entire market loses momentum. Estate agents see fewer viewings. Mortgage brokers process fewer applications. Conveyancers have less work. The ripple effects damage the entire property ecosystem, all to raise some short-term Treasury revenue. Then there's inheritance tax, and this is where things get really nasty for anyone building a property portfolio to pass on to their kids. Currently, estates worth more than £325,000 get hit with 40% inheritance tax. There's an additional residence nil rate band of £175,000 if you're passing your main home to direct descendants, meaning a couple can potentially pass on £1 million tax-free if structured correctly. But here's the problem. That's total estate value, and for property investors, portfolios can easily exceed those thresholds. Property portfolios held in personal names are fully exposed to inheritance tax. If you've built a portfolio worth £2 million over your lifetime, you pass away and you're single. Your family is looking at roughly £670,000 in inheritance tax after allowances. If you're married and your spouse has already died, using both allowances might reduce that, but you're still facing a massive bill. Your family could be forced to sell properties in a fire sale just to pay the tax within the 6-month deadline. They might have to sell good, cash-flowing properties at below market value because they're desperate for liquidity. They might lose properties you spent decades building. Now the speculation is that Reeves might tighten the existing reliefs or make it harder to use legitimate structures to reduce IHT exposure. She might reduce the residents' nil rate band, taking it back down or eliminating it entirely. She might change the rules around gifting property before death, extending the 7-year rule or adding new restrictions. She might increase the headline rate from 40% to something even higher, though that seems less likely politically. Every option on the table makes it harder to pass property wealth to the next generation. And here's the cruel irony. These portfolios were often built specifically to create generational wealth, to give families security and income, to ensure your children and grandchildren had assets and opportunities. But the tax system is increasingly designed to strip that wealth away the moment you die. The government wants to tax your income when you earn it, tax your property gains when you sell, and then tax whatever's left when you pass it on. At some point, you have to ask whether building wealth in the UK even makes sense anymore when the system is designed to confiscate it. Remember when the Chancellor stood up and said she wouldn't raise income tax, national insurance, or VAT? That sounds great until you realise what it actually means for anyone with assets. Those 3 taxes make up the vast majority of government revenue. Income tax brings in around 250 billion per year. National insurance adds another 160 billion. VAT contributes around 160 billion. Together, that's over 570 billion out of roughly 1 trillion in total tax revenue. If she can't touch them, and she needs an extra £30 billion, she has to go after everything else. And in the UK, wealth means property. It's that simple. The average person's biggest asset is their home. For investors, it's their portfolios. For older generations, it's the house price growth they've benefited from over decades. All of that is now in the crosshairs, because Reeves has publicly ruled out the easy options. She even confirmed in an interview that gambling taxes are going up, describing it as firms paying their fair share. She admitted she's never placed a bet in her life, which tells you everything about how out of touch she is with ordinary people. But that's beside the point. Gambling tax rises might raise 2 or 3 billion at most. Where's the other 27 billion coming from? Property. Business taxes on companies, though she's ruled out corporation tax rises. Pensions, which we'll get to. Assets, wealth, capital. There's literally nowhere else to go. And property is the easiest political target because landlords don't have much public sympathy, even though they provide homes for millions of people who can't or don't want to buy. Section 24 still haunts landlords like a ghost that won't leave. And there's genuine fear it could get even worse. For anyone who doesn't know the history here, this was the rule change that removed mortgage interest relief for landlords, introduced gradually from 2016 and fully implemented by 2020. Before Section 24, you could deduct your full mortgage interest from your rental income before calculating tax. It made sense because mortgage interest is a legitimate business expense, just like it is for any other business. After Section 24, you can only claim a 20% tax credit on mortgage interest, and you pay tax on the full rental income. This absolutely destroyed the finances of higher-rate taxpayer landlords. Some saw their tax bills triple overnight because they were suddenly paying 40% tax on income that wasn't really income at all, just money passing through to the mortgage lender. Thousands of landlords left the market entirely because their properties went from profitable to loss-making. Some were forced to sell at the worst possible time. Others restructured into limited companies, paying thousands in legal fees and stamp duty to move properties across. The policy was sold as targeting wealthy landlords, but it actually hammered ordinary people with 1 or 2 rental properties trying to build retirement income. And now there's speculation that Reeves might go even further. She could restrict relief on other property expenses like maintenance, repairs, or letting agent fees. She could introduce new calculations that increase taxable rental income by reclassifying certain deductions. She could create new surcharges specifically targeting buy-to-let landlords, maybe a special additional income tax rate just for rental income. The Treasury knows that landlords are stuck. You can't just sell instantly without triggering massive CGT bills, especially if the rates are about to go up. You can't easily restructure without enormous costs, so landlords become a captive revenue source that government can keep squeezing year after year. It's like they've realised they have a group of people who are financially committed to staying in the market and therefore can be taxed relentlessly. Council tax revaluation is the stealth attack nobody's talking about enough, but it could be the most painful change of all for property investors. Properties in England were last valued for council tax purposes in 1991. Think about that date. John Major was Prime Minister. The Soviet Union still existed. The internet wasn't a thing yet. Mobile phones were the size of bricks. And most importantly, property prices were completely different. A house in London that was worth £80,000 in 1991 might be worth £1.5 million today. A flat that was valued at £50,000 is now worth £600,000. The growth has been wildly uneven, with London and the South East seeing massive gains while some northern areas have grown more modestly. If there's a revaluation based on current property values, millions of properties will jump multiple council tax bands overnight. Your Band D property might become Band F or G. Your council tax could literally double or triple, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. For homeowners, this is painful. For landlords with multiple properties, this is catastrophic. If your council tax goes from £2,000 to £5,000 per year on a rental property, that's £3,000 straight off your net rental income. For portfolio landlords with 10 or 20 properties, we're talking tens of thousands in extra costs every single year, forever. And unlike other taxes, council tax isn't based on income or profit. You pay it whether your property is occupied or void, whether you're making money or losing it, whether your tenant pays rent or doesn't. The liability falls on the landlord during void periods, and with rental market challenges increasing void times, that's more and more common. The political calculation here is that revaluation sounds fair to voters. Why should someone in a mansion pay the same council tax as someone in a modest flat just because both properties happen to be in the same band back in 1991? It's an easy sell to the public, but the reality is it's another massive wealth tax on property owners, and it's coming. The government has been talking about revaluation for years, always backing away because of political fear. But with Reeves desperate for revenue and running out of options, the political calculation might change. She might decide the revenue is worth the backlash. So what are smart investors actually doing right now while there's still time before November 26th? First, anyone who was planning to sell investment properties in the next 2 or 3 years is having serious conversations about bringing those sales forward before the budget. Yes, you might not get the absolute peak price by rushing. Yes, you might miss out on another year of rental income. Yes, the timing might not be perfect, but if CGT is about to jump from 24% to 40 or 45%, completing now could save you literally hundreds of thousands of pounds. Run the numbers on your own portfolio. Take a property you bought for £300,000 that's now worth £600,000. Under current CGT rules, you pay around £72,000 in tax. Under 45% rates, you pay £135,000. That's a £63,000 difference. Would you rather sell now at maybe £590,000 and save £63,000 in tax, or wait for £600,000 and lose the extra tax? The math is brutal but clear. Second, investors are looking hard at restructuring ownership. Moving properties into limited companies has become more attractive despite the upfront costs. Companies pay corporation tax on profits, currently 19% on the first $50,000 and 25% above that, which is significantly lower than higher rate income tax at 40%. The problem is moving properties from personal ownership into a company triggers stamp duty and potentially CGT on the transfer. It's expensive, but if you're planning to hold properties long term and pass them to the next generation, company structures offer better flexibility and potentially lower overall tax over time. Some investors are biting the bullet and paying the restructuring costs now because they believe the long-term savings justify it. Third, people are exploring family investment companies and trusts for inheritance tax purposes. These structures are complex and definitely require specialist advice, but they can offer better protection than holding everything personally. You might be able to gift properties into trust structures that start the 7-year clock for IHT purposes. You might be able to use family investment companies with different share classes to gradually pass value to children while retaining control. None of this is simple, and all of it requires expensive professional advice. But for large portfolios, the potential IHT savings run into hundreds of thousands or even millions. Fourth, experienced investors are stress testing their portfolios against multiple worst-case scenarios simultaneously. What if CGT goes to 45% and you can't sell without massive tax bills? What if stamp duty surcharges increase to 10% and nobody wants to buy your properties because the transaction costs are too high? What if council tax revaluation doubles your bills and destroys your yields? What if mortgage rates stay high at 5 or 6% for years and interest rates don't come down like everyone predicted? What if rental income growth slows or even reverses in a recession? What if Section 24 gets tightened further and you lose more deductions? Smart investors are running all these scenarios and asking themselves honestly whether their portfolios can survive. Some are concluding they can't and are planning exits. Others are identifying which properties are most vulnerable and considering selective sales to reduce exposure. The investors who survive market downturns and policy changes are the ones who plan for disaster, not the ones who assume everything will be fine. Fifth, and this is controversial, but some experienced property investors are genuinely considering whether the UK market is worth the hassle anymore compared to opportunities overseas. When you stack up Section 24, potential CGT rises to 45%, stamp duty surcharges potentially hitting 10%, inheritance tax at 40%, possible council tax revaluation, increased regulation making it harder to manage tenants, Section 21 ban removing no-fault evictions, proposals for mandatory property standards that cost thousands to implement, and a government that views landlords as villains rather than housing providers, some investors are concluding that other countries offer better risk-reward profiles. Places like Portugal, Spain, parts of the United States, or even emerging markets in Eastern Europe offer better tax treatment, stronger property rights, and governments that don't actively hate landlords. Obviously, international property investment brings its own complexities around currency risk, legal systems, and management challenges. But the conversation is happening in investor circles in ways it wasn't 5 years ago. The budget is on November 26th, which feels impossibly far away when you're worried about your portfolio, but it's also alarmingly close when you think about how long property transactions take to complete. Between now and then, every property investor in the country is holding their breath, checking news websites obsessively, and gaming out different scenarios. Rachel Reeves has been Chancellor for 15 months now, but the decisions she makes in the next few weeks will define her entire tenure and could reshape the UK property market for a generation. She's not personally responsible for 15 years of economic underperformance since the financial crisis. She's not responsible for global interest rates staying higher than expected or trade wars initiated by other countries. But she absolutely did make specific promises about taxes during the election campaign that have now backed her into a corner where property investors are the obvious, perhaps only target. The Economist interviewed her, and she basically confirmed what everyone suspected. Gambling taxes are going up, which is fine, but that's nowhere near enough money. The real revenue has to come from somewhere else, and that somewhere else is property, pensions, and accumulated wealth. For landlords who've already been battered by Section 24 destroying their mortgage interest relief, who've watched yields compress as mortgage rates climbed from 1% to 6% in the space of 2 years, who've dealt with massively increased regulation around energy efficiency certificates, electrical safety standards, carbon monoxide detectors, and tenant rights expansions that make it nearly impossible to remove problem tenants. This feels like the final straw. How many more policy hits can the sector take before it completely breaks? How many more landlords need to exit before politicians realise they're creating a rental housing crisis by making it economically unviable to provide rental housing? Here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody in government wants to admit publicly. The UK needs a healthy, functioning private rental sector. Not everyone can afford to buy, especially younger people and those in expensive areas. Not everyone wants to buy because they need flexibility for work or life changes. Social housing waiting lists are enormous, with over 1 million households waiting, and councils don't have the money to build at scale. Housing associations are struggling with increased costs and debt servicing. The private rental sector houses roughly 4.5 million households, about 19% of all homes in England. That's millions of people who need somewhere to live. But government policy over the last decade has been systematically hostile to landlords, treating them like villains and exploiters rather than providers of essential housing. Every new regulation, every tax increase, every removal of rights makes it harder and less profitable to be a landlord. And now, with this budget crisis, it's about to get significantly worse. When you make it economically unviable to be a landlord, landlords exit the market. When landlords exit, they sell properties. Some properties go to owner-occupiers, reducing rental supply. Some go to other investors, but usually only at discounted prices that reflect the poor returns. When rental supply drops while demand stays constant or grows, basic economics tells you what happens. Rents go up. Tenants end up paying more for worse properties because landlords who remain have less competition. The housing crisis deepens, homelessness increases, but short-term Treasury revenue targets don't care about long-term market consequences or social outcomes. Rachel Reeves needs £30 billion, and she needs it now, before the next election, so property investors are going to pay regardless of what it does to the rental market. The political calculation is that landlords are unpopular enough that hitting them won't cost votes, and renters won't connect higher rents to government policy. What happens next depends entirely on that budget on November 26th, which is now the single most important date in the UK property calendar. Will CGT rates align with income tax, devastating anyone trying to exit investments? Will stamp duty surcharges increase, killing transaction volumes and market liquidity? Will inheritance tax reliefs tighten, making it impossible to pass portfolios to your children without massive tax bills? Will there be new attacks on mortgage interest relief, or changes to how rental income is calculated for tax purposes? Will council tax revaluation proceed, potentially doubling bills overnight for millions of properties? Will there be new wealth taxes we haven't even thought of yet? Some of these changes are virtually certain at this point. CGT increases look almost guaranteed based on the briefings coming out of the Treasury. Others are highly likely. Stamp duty changes have been trailed by multiple sources. Some are possible but less certain. Council tax revaluation is politically risky but desperately needed for revenue. But the overall direction of travel is absolutely clear and undeniable. If you own property beyond your main residence, whether that's one buy-to-let or a 50-property portfolio, you're about to pay significantly more to the government. The only questions are exactly how much more and through which specific mechanisms. The next few weeks before the budget are critical. If you've been thinking about selling properties, restructuring your portfolio, or making major financial decisions, now is the time to act, not later. If you've been delaying conversations with accountants, tax advisors, or financial planners, Book those meetings immediately and pay whatever they charge, because good advice could save you tens of thousands or more. And if you've been ignoring all the budget speculation, hoping it won't be as bad as people say, hoping that somehow property will be spared, you need to wake up right now. It's going to be worse than you think, not better. This isn't pessimism or doom-mongering. It's realism based on the economic numbers, the political constraints, and the revenue requirements. Rachel Reeves is trapped in an impossible situation of partly her own making, and trapped politicians do desperate things. Property investors are about to find out exactly how desperate she's willing to get, and how much financial pain she's willing to inflict to fill that £30 billion hole. Make sure you're subscribed to Property Reporter, because we'll be covering every single detail of that November 26 budget the moment it drops, breaking down exactly what each change means for your portfolio, your tax bill, and your investment strategy going forward. We'll have expert analysis, tax calculations, and practical guidance on what to do in response to whatever gets announced. The UK property market is about to change dramatically in ways that will affect investors for years or even decades. The investors who survive and thrive are the ones who see the changes coming and adapt quickly, not the ones who hope everything will somehow work out fine. Don't be the person who realises 6 months from now that you should have acted before the budget when you still had options. Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering you owe an extra £43,000 every single year just for living in your own home. Not a mortgage payment, not a one-time fee, an annual tax bill that never stops coming. This isn't some dystopian fantasy. It's a real proposal being seriously considered by the current government, and it could devastate millions of property owners across the UK. We're talking about people who've worked their entire lives, paid off their mortgages, and planned their retirement around staying in the homes they love. All of that could be ripped away because of a tax scheme that's being discussed behind closed doors right now. The Times, The Guardian, and other major outlets have been reporting on this over the past week, and what I've uncovered is genuinely alarming. This isn't just bad news for landlords or property investors. If you own any property in the UK, especially if you're anywhere near London or the South East, you need to hear this. Before we go any further, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe to Property Reporter for the latest property news, market updates, and government policy changes that could affect your home and your wealth. We're bringing you the information that mainstream media buries in the fine print, and we need your help spreading the word. So what exactly is this new tax, and why should you care? The government is floating the idea of completely scrapping two taxes that everyone is familiar with: stamp duty and council tax. On the surface, that might sound appealing. Who likes paying stamp duty when you buy a property? Who enjoys their council tax bill showing up every year? But here's the catch. They're not getting rid of these taxes out of generosity. They're replacing them with something far more expensive for millions of people. It's called a property value tax, and it works completely differently from what we have now. Under the current system, you pay stamp duty once when you purchase a property, and then you pay council tax annually based on outdated property valuations from 1991. It's not a perfect system, but it's manageable for most people. The new proposal would eliminate both of those and introduce an annual tax based on your property's current market value. And this is where things get really concerning. According to the leaked details, any property worth over £500,000 would be hit with an annual tax of 0.5% of its value. Properties worth over £1 million would face an even higher rate of 0.8% every single year. Let that sink in for a moment. This isn't a one-time payment. This is an annual charge that will keep increasing as property values rise. Now, you might be thinking that £500,000 sounds like a lot of money, and surely only wealthy people own properties worth that much. But that's not how the UK property market works anymore. The average house price in London is already over £660,000. That means the vast majority of homeowners in the capital would immediately fall into this tax bracket. We're not talking about mansion owners or property tycoons. We're talking about ordinary families living in modest three-bedroom terraced houses in areas like Croydon, Walthamstow, or Barking. These aren't luxury properties. They're normal family homes that happen to be located in a region where property values have skyrocketed over the past 2 decades. And here's where the real injustice comes in. Many of these homeowners are what financial experts call asset-rich but cash-poor. They might own a property worth £700,000 or even £1 million, but that doesn't mean they have a lot of income. In fact, a huge proportion of these people are retirees living on fixed pensions. They bought their homes decades ago when prices were a fraction of what they are today. They've paid off their mortgages. They've worked hard their entire lives. And now they're living modestly on pension income that might only be £15,000 or £20,000 a year. Their home is their biggest asset, but it doesn't generate income. They can't eat bricks and mortar. They can afford to stay in their homes because their monthly expenses are low. No mortgage, reasonable heating bills, and manageable council tax. But if this new property value tax comes in, everything changes overnight. Let me give you a real example that shows just how devastating this could be. I have a friend who owns a property in the southeast worth around £6 million. Now, before you start thinking this person is some ultra-wealthy elite who can afford anything, let me explain their situation. They're retired. They worked extremely hard for decades, made smart financial decisions, and invested in property when they had the chance. Their home is beautiful, and they've earned the right to enjoy it in their retirement. But here's the thing. Their annual income from their pension is nowhere near enough to cover a massive new tax bill. I sat down and did the math. If this property value tax goes through at the proposed rate, they would be looking at an annual bill of approximately £43,000 every single year. That's more than double their entire pension income. There's no way they could afford it. They would be forced to sell their home, uproot their entire life, and move to a cheaper area just to survive financially. And it gets worse. The government is also considering introducing a seller's tax on top of everything else. So not only would my friend be forced to sell their home because they can't afford the annual tax, but they'd also get hit with a huge tax bill just for selling it. It's a double penalty that punishes people for circumstances completely beyond their control. They didn't ask for property prices to rise to these levels. They didn't demand that their home's value increase by millions of pounds. But now they're being treated like they've done something wrong simply because they own a valuable asset. But the problems don't stop with individual homeowners. This tax would create massive distortions across the entire UK property market, and the consequences would be felt by everyone, whether you own a property or not. Think about what happens to properties that are currently valued at around £450,000. Right now, these homes are comfortably below the £500,000 threshold where the new tax kicks in. But property values don't stay frozen in time. They increase gradually every year. So what happens when a property that's currently worth £470,000 starts approaching £500,000? Suddenly, sellers have a huge incentive to keep their asking prices just below that threshold. Why would anyone pay £501,000 for a property when it means getting hammered with an annual tax bill? The result is that properties near this threshold will get stuck. Their values will be artificially suppressed because crossing that line becomes financially toxic for buyers. Meanwhile, properties that are already well above the threshold will likely see their prices increase even more. If you're selling a home worth £2 million and you know you're going to face a seller's tax when you offload it, you're going to want to maximise the sale price to cover that tax and still walk away with a decent amount. So prices at the higher end of the market will get pushed up further, making the housing crisis even worse for people trying to get on the ladder. The rich get richer, the middle gets squeezed, and the poor get priced out entirely. It's a recipe for economic disaster. And then there's the regional inequality issue. which is perhaps the most absurd part of this entire proposal. Under the current council tax system, everyone pays something, regardless of where they live or what their property is worth. It's not perfect, and the valuations are wildly outdated, but at least it's somewhat fair in the sense that everyone contributes. But under this new property value tax, the burden would fall almost entirely on homeowners in London and the South East. Up north, where property prices are much lower, hardly anyone would pay a penny. The average house price in somewhere like Doncaster or Hull is well below £500,000. In fact, most properties in these areas are worth less than £200,000. So under the new system, people in these regions would essentially get a free ride. No stamp duty, no council tax, and no property value tax either. But someone has to pay for local services. Someone has to fund the councils, the roads, the schools, and everything else that council tax currently covers. So who picks up the tab? The homeowners in London and the South East, that's who. You'd have a situation where people in expensive areas are subsidising the entire country while people in cheaper regions pay nothing. Now, some redistribution of wealth already happens through the tax system, and that's generally considered fair. But this takes it to an extreme level that's hard to justify. Why should someone living in a modest 3-bedroom house in Croydon be forced to pay thousands of pounds a year to fund services in a completely different part of the country while their neighbours up north pay nothing? It makes no sense, and it's politically toxic. There's also the question of fairness for people who've spent their entire lives planning for retirement. Most people who own valuable properties in London and the South East didn't buy them last year. They bought them 20, 30, or even 40 years ago. Back then, these properties cost a fraction of what they're worth today. People made long-term financial plans based on the tax system that existed at the time. They worked hard, saved money, paid off their mortgages, and set themselves up for a comfortable retirement. They calculated their pension income, factored in their expected expenses, and made sure everything balanced out. And now, decades later, the government wants to change the rules and hit them with a massive new tax bill that they never saw coming and never budgeted for. That's not just unfair, it's a betrayal of the social contract between citizens and the state. When you work hard, play by the rules, and plan your life around the existing system, you shouldn't have the rug pulled out from under you at the last minute. Especially not when you're in your 60s, 70s, or 80s and don't have the ability to go back to work and earn more money to cover these new costs. These are people who've contributed to society their entire lives. They've paid income tax, national insurance, VAT, and every other tax under the sun. And now, in their retirement, they're being told that's not enough. They need to pay even more, or they'll be forced to sell their homes and leave the communities they've lived in for decades. The political implications of this proposal are massive, and I genuinely believe that if Labour pushes this through, it could cost them the next election. Property ownership is deeply personal for people. Your home isn't just an asset on a balance sheet. It's where you raised your kids, where you celebrated birthdays and holidays, where you've built a lifetime of memories. The idea that the government could force you out of your home simply because it's become too valuable is something that will resonate emotionally with millions of voters. And it's not just Conservative voters who will be outraged. Plenty of Labour supporters own property in London and the South East. They're going to be hit by this tax just as hard as anyone else, and they're not going to be happy about it. There are better ways to fix the problems with council tax and stamp duty without resorting to such a blunt and punishing instrument. Council tax valuations could be updated to reflect current property values, but with bands adjusted so that people aren't suddenly facing enormous bills. Stamp duty could be reformed to reduce the burden on first-time buyers, while increasing it slightly on second homes and investment properties. There are smart, targeted solutions that could raise revenue without destroying people's retirement plans or forcing them out of their homes. But instead, the government seems determined to pursue this nuclear option that will cause maximum disruption and maximum pain for ordinary homeowners. The worst part is that this isn't just speculation or rumour. Multiple credible news outlets have reported that this proposal is being seriously discussed within government circles. The Times has covered it extensively. The Guardian has written about it. This isn't some fringe idea being floated by a backbench MP. This is something that senior figures in the government are actively considering, and it could appear in the next budget. That means it could become reality sooner than you think, and once it's in place, it will be almost impossible to reverse. Governments rarely give up a new source of revenue once they've introduced it. So if this tax goes through, you can expect it to stick around for decades, with rates gradually increasing over time as the government looks for more money. So what can you do about it? First, spread the word. Share this video with everyone you know who owns property. The more people who are aware of this proposal, the more pressure the government will face to back down. Public backlash works. We've seen it time and time again with unpopular policies that get quietly shelved after widespread criticism. Hit that share button right now and send this to your family, your friends, your colleagues. Make sure they know what's at stake. Second, make your voice heard. Write to your MP. Tell them exactly how this tax would affect you and your family. Politicians respond to constituent pressure, especially when an election is on the horizon. If enough people make it clear that this policy is unacceptable, they'll think twice before pushing it through. This is one of the most extreme and unfair tax proposals I've come across, and I've covered plenty of controversial policies on this channel. The Renters' Rights Bill had its problems, but at least you could argue there were some genuine intentions to protect tenants mixed in with the bad ideas. But this property value tax, I can't see any upside for ordinary people. It punishes success, destroys retirement plans, creates massive regional inequality, distorts the property market, and forces people out of homes they've lived in for decades. It's bad policy on every single level, and it needs to be stopped before it becomes law. If you found this video helpful, and you want to stay updated on all the latest property news and government policy changes, make sure you're subscribed to Property Reporter and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. We're going to keep digging into this story and bringing you the facts that other channels ignore. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think about this tax proposal. Are you worried about how it might affect you? Do you think the government will actually go through with it? I want to hear your thoughts, and if you haven't already, check out our free guide on navigating the property market in uncertain times. The link is in the description below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.